Pay very close attention as this SUV just barely sneaks by the semi as the passing lane starts to end. What a narrow escape. Now watch as this truck, which is pulling a trailer, tries to pass another semi as the passing lane comes to an end, riding that center line, and just barely avoiding one hell of a head-on collision. But wait, it gets worse. Now watch as this pickup tries to make a tight squeeze between the semi and the center line at the very last second. Ugh, he just barely makes it. Is it really worth risking your life to get to Las Vegas 20 minutes early so that way you can gamble your 401k and hit on chicks with low self-esteem? Just saying. Unfortunately, this type of driving behavior is all too common on US Route 93 going back and forth from Phoenix, Arizona to Las Vegas, Nevada. Let me show you on a map. Technically, US Route 93 starts in Wickenburg, Arizona and ends all the way up at the Canadian border, don't you know? But down here in Arizona, when most people think of US Route 93, they simply think of it as the highway to Las Vegas. And in today's video, we are going to be focusing on this part of Highway 93, going from the small town of Wickenburg to the even smaller town of Wickiup. This 74-mile stretch of highway is probably the most dangerous part of the entire drive to Las Vegas, mainly due to the fact that you have an undivided highway with passing lanes every so many miles. But the problem is, everyone is rushing in at the last second, usually to get ahead of semis, because there is many long stretches of inclines on that road, and if you get caught behind a semi, it will slow you down and you're going to have to go at their pace, at least until another passing lane approaches. This usually results in impatient drivers taking many risky maneuvers on this road, just like the ones you're seeing right now. Here's a few unpleasant facts for you. In 2015, there were 181 crashes between Wickenburg and Wickiup, and in 2019, that number jumped to 248 crashes, and according to ABC 15 Arizona, Highway 93 averages 5 crashes a week, which is about 1 crash per every 15,000 cars. It's no surprise that according to a 2018 study done by Value Penguin, it ranked US Route 93 in Arizona as the most dangerous highway in the United States, which doesn't surprise me one bit. I mean, just look at all the footage I acquired over the course of a weekend. Just parking my car on the side of the road and sending my drone up in the air, I didn't have to wait too long before I started seeing cars making these risky passes. Now, the drive from Wickenburg to Wickiup is only a small section of US Route 93. However, from Wickiup to Las Vegas, it's an additional 158-mile drive. And this got me thinking, accidents happen all the time up and down this highway, day in and day out. So is it mostly just impatient drivers making risky maneuvers? Well, it would certainly seem that way. And in fact, a fire chief out of Congress, Arizona even stated, most of our wrecks that we go on out there are within a mile of a passing zone. So for any regular drivers going back and forth from Phoenix to Las Vegas, or any tourists visiting the area, if you see these signs, do not, and I repeat, do not take them as a challenge to pass as many vehicles as you can to get to the front of traffic. And for the love of God, please give semis their space. If you try to fight over a lane with a semi, you're going to get your ass kicked, and more than likely you're going to get into an accident, and if you do, consider the following. Of the 74 miles of highway between Wickenburg and Wickiup, there is 0 services out there. I repeat, 0 services. And if you do get into a pretty bad accident and have to call 911, by the way, that is if you can even get cell reception to make a phone call. There's areas out there on this highway where you'll drive for many miles without even getting a single bar of service. And of course, even if you do, according to mkfirm.com, the average wait time for help to arrive is 21 minutes. Back in 2021, there was an accident out here that involved a state trooper's vehicle catching fire while he was still inside. Luckily, there was some good Samaritans that were able to stop and pull him from the burning vehicle. However, one of the good Samaritans still had to leave the area and drive to where cell service could be reached before they could call for help. And here's a not-so-fun fact. ABC 15 Arizona interviewed a couple of firefighters about the response time out there a few years ago, and here's what they had to say.
Are there literally people on US 93 who die waiting for help?
Yes, there is.
If you do want to watch that video clip in its entirety, I'll link that down in the description below. But for those of you that are not familiar with the drive, this highway winds through some really remote parts of the desert where there is literally nothing out there. And in fact, at one point in time, there was a little rest stop known as Nothing, Arizona. But that became abandoned by 2005. Although for the longest time, that was the only stop between Wickenburg and Wickiup where you could get gas, food, and drinks. In the last 5 years I've lived in the Phoenix, Arizona area, I've probably gone back and forth to Las Vegas well over 100 times, and I've witnessed a variety of erratic driving behaviors. But one thing I've always wondered, is it just people in a hurry trying to get somewhere, or is there additional underlying factors at work here? Such as construction, road conditions, failure to maintain a good running vehicle, or even the occasional coyote jumping out in front of traffic. By the way, if you ever happen to see a truck hauling something like this, do yourself a favor and get into the other lane immediately, or stay as far behind it as possible. You know what I mean. We've all seen that movie. According to ABC 15 Arizona, despite the increase of crashes and deaths on US Route 93 from 2018 to 2020, civil and criminal traffic tickets were down significantly. And when I first started thinking about this video idea, my initial guess as to why there were so many crashes, I was thinking it either had to be excessive speeding or drunk driving. Truth be told, in all the research I did on this topic, I don't ever recall drunk driving popping up as a concern. But when it came to excessive speeding, we hit a green light. According to ABC 15 news article titled, Arizona Police Increase Patrols on US 93 near Wickenburg After Traffic Fatalities, Sergeant Daniel Morales, who grew up around Congress, Arizona, stated the following. Many of these accidents involve travelers or truckers who are speeding or passing in prohibited areas. They're not familiar with how narrow the road is and with the general amount of traffic they have on the road, especially at nighttime. It's very dark out there. And I couldn't agree more. It's one thing to have to put up with reckless drivers during the day, but at night, it's a completely different ballgame. I vividly remember one instance where I was coming back from Las Vegas and I was maybe 30 miles from Wickenburg. It was pitch black out there on that highway and there was no vehicles ahead of me. All of a sudden, a rather large truck in the oncoming lane was coming up over a hill pretty fast. And because he didn't turn off his high beams, I had a hard time gauging where the center line was. Now I knew I couldn't move over onto the shoulder anymore because, well, there was no shoulder. It's just road and then desert. The last thing I wanted to have happen was to have my front right tire catch some loose dirt on the side of the road and then pull me off the pavement and launch me into the desert. Although I would argue I would have probably been better off in that scenario compared to a head-on collision with a large truck. And I was driving a Hyundai Accent, so yeah, I would totally get pancaked. Back to the story though, the only thing I could do was slow down and focus on the white line on the side of the road. Thankfully, it was over pretty quick and there was no accident. But I'll tell you this, on that narrow part of the road, even if there was no other traffic coming, it still doesn't feel like there's enough room. And if anybody watching this has ever traveled on that road and you have a story you'd like to share, please feel free to do so down in the comments section. I'm sure my story is pretty mellow compared to the numerous close calls that happen out there. Now, there are certain parts along US Route 93 that tend to be a little bumpier than other parts, which got me thinking, maybe it's possible the road conditions could also be a factor leading to many of these car crashes, but that doesn't seem to be the case. According to an interview on ABC 15 Arizona, a spokesperson from ADOT said the following.
Every road that we build and maintain is done to federal safety standards. Unfortunately, a lot of people drive it without a lot of regard for their personal safety or the safety of others, and that's why you see these horrific crashes.
And this totally aligns with another statistic from ADOT, stating 94% of all crashes on US 93 are caused by driver behavior.